years.
Okay, we're back. We're talking about the economic stimulus package and what it's going to do to Pennsylvania, good and bad, and how it's going to relate to the budget that Governor Rendell's been talking about and the legislature is going to be wrestling with in the months ahead. One of the things that people are concerned about, obviously, are property taxes, especially the property taxes that go to school districts. For years now, we've been hearing new casinos are going to raise the kind of revenue that would allow us at some point maybe to eliminate property taxes that go to school districts. But so far, we really haven't seen much of that. Still, to be honest, to be fair about it, there are some casinos that aren't up and running yet, for example, here in Pittsburgh. But David, you've introduced legislation that would stop for 2 years the school district's ability to raise the millage.
Correct.
For schools.
Yes, to freeze them at their present mills. And my thinking behind that, PJ, is this. Last year we gave school districts from the state, 501 school districts, they got about a 5.5% increase, about $275 million. The governor's proposing for 09-10 another increase of $300 million. And if that becomes law, and I think will be a bipartisan consensus to do that, we will have seen state aid to our local school districts increase about 11% over 2 years. Now, in addition, there's going to be federal money that's probably going to be channeled. It's going to be channeled through the state, likely for special education. Don't hold me to that, but it seems like that's where it's going to go to. So my feeling is, with increased federal aid, increased state aid for public education, school districts need to hold the line and not raise property taxes for the next 2 years.
That's a good thing, isn't it, Glenn?
Well, it is a good thing, but hearing that whole discussion is disturbing to me, because we have inflation last year that was 3 or 4%. I don't know the final number. This year we have deflation, so prices are actually going down. And that's the world we're all operating in the private sector. And yet government, my goodness, the state and federal government, they gave 11% more to the schools over 2 years, which is way, way, way above inflation. So the government is just on a spending binge. I mean, the problem we've had...
When we look at educating the kids, there are other factors besides inflation that you look at when you make out a budget, right?
Well, but you look at Pittsburgh alone, right? We spend about $20,000 per student. Now, that's in the city of schools of Pittsburgh. That's what it costs to send your kid to private school. I mean, a senior in high school at a top private school in the area is about $20,000, and yet you look at the difference. Oh yeah, you look at the difference though. Here we are, $20,000 per student, and the state law says you can never cut the amount of money in the budget for school, even when the population is going down. I mean, public schools need competition so badly, and yet these school districts fight charter schools. They fight homeschooling. One of the proposals in Washington is to eliminate homeschooling, and this is a restriction on freedom. This is we have to have education be great in this country to be successful going forward, and we're just messing around with it, and we're not allowing the kind of competition that would reinvigorate and really create change in education.
Just what I'm trying to say is, given the significant increases in aid to public education from both the state and the federal government, I'm just saying we should just require school districts to hold the line on property taxes for the next 2 years. And Glenn, I hear what you're saying.
I don't disagree with you at all.
I hear what you're saying about inflation and deflation, but understand that about 3/4 of the cost of public schools, of their budgets, are for wages and salaries. I mean, that's the biggest cost driver in their budget, and the public school budgets, the costs are always increasing. There's very little things in a local school district's budget that's actually decreasing. So you're always going to see almost a need and a necessity. And all I'm saying is that if the state's shouldering the burden and putting more dollars into public education at the state, the school districts need to hold the line on raising school property taxes.
School districts should hold the line on raising property taxes, given all the money that's flowing to them. I agree. But what you're saying about the cost always goes up. It's there's no way to stop that. The prices are. That's what happens when you have a state-owned, government-owned monopoly. You can always raise prices. You can always raise costs when you've got a monopoly like that. And I'm saying that that's a fail. The reason we have such failing public schools in America is because it's a government monopoly, and it's tax funded, and it's got to change if we're going to have great education again in America.
I don't know that a government monopoly is the main reason for a problem that we have with education. It's mismanagement. I don't think there's any question about that. And even now we have cyber schools, we have the charter schools available, and private schools. There are options out there. They're expensive options.
Not for most people can't afford to get into one of those options. And charter schools are a real improvement. Public charter schools are the one really new competitive thing, and the education bureaucracy, the establishment, and frankly, the teachers union and the core of the Democratic Party has fought it and fought it and fought it and still fights it.
You know, politics
Arlen
aside,
Specter voted against
I understand,
in D.C.
but
schools.
Politics aside, if you get into private education and do away with the public school system, what you're going to have is an elite school system for the people that can afford it, and a school system that's not worth anything for the people that can't afford it.
Oh no, I disagree.
That's the way private enterprise works.
Oh no,
If you can afford a luxury car, then you're driving a luxury car.
No, you
if you can only
misunderstand.
afford a Yugo, that's it.
PJ, you misunderstand. In Europe, they tie the state funding for the public schools in Europe, in most countries, they tie the funding to the kid. So if the government's going to spend $20,000 per kid, like we do in Pittsburgh,
right,
the family then chooses among a menu of schools that they can send the kid to. And those public schools have to compete for the kids because they only get the funding if they get the kids.
But that doesn't have anything to do with if I'm running a school and I say I'm going to charge $40,000 for a great education. You're only getting $20,000 for the state. You have to come up with the other $20,000. You're going to get a good education. Your kid is. A parent that can't afford that is not going to get such a good education.
But right now, if the funding should be tied to the kid, so the parent makes a decision.
I'm saying that doesn't necessarily work if you do away with public schools.
Well, it works in Europe, and they have a much better education system than we do in most European countries.
And understand that it's not a state monopoly on education. There's 501 individual school districts out there. 501. And the governor proposed, in his budget, that we ought to take a look at how do we deliver education? How is it structured? Now, he got quoted saying, there ought to be 100. Frankly, I think we need to take a serious look. And we ought to form the bipartisan task force to look at other states, look at Maryland that has them.
Didn't the legislature just do that 2 years ago, though?
No.
Wasn't there a study done 2 years ago?
That was a costing out study to basically determine how much dollars does it take to educate a kid adequately in the state. So that's what that was. Now, this study that this task force the governor is suggesting, House and Senate, Democrat and Republican, and let's go out for a year and let's study the idea of how many school districts do we need. I don't think it's 501. I think it's more than 100. But I think it's somewhere in between.
Okay.
And that's what we ought to do. We ought to take a serious look at it, see if there's a way to consolidate, deliver better education, and reduce some of the administrative costs.
It's a red herring, though.
We want to take a break, and we're going to come back in a moment, and we'll talk more about the economic stimulus package and how it might be affecting us in Pennsylvania. Stand by. Don't go away.